Good day to everybody. For sure, this topic of battery and cells, lithium-ion battery, let's say, is a new challenge for all firemen and all also citizens in the world. And I will give a very short input on this peculiar topic, and also mentioning all my co-authors, because I want to give my thanks to Gilles Elgeer. Gilles Elgeer is the corporate HSE manager of Saft. Saft is another international company building automotive cells, and also cells for airplanes and energy storage containers. Baptiste Giovannioli is one of our junior HSE engineer. Jean-Jacques Bozabalia is a colonel of fire service in charge of innovation in Bouches-du-Rhône Fire Department. Florian Bozek is the engineer in charge of building safety in ACC, which is a company built by Mercedes, Stellantis, and Total Energy. Christophe Morin, our head of analyze and testing facility. Emmanuel Anat, which is a colonel of Gironde Fire Service, and he's the counterpart who helped us to do the trials and tests I will show. Thank you all of them. After this testimonial, I want to go directly in the focus of the talk, which will be based on some context element and some trials and tests, but not on an exhaustive view for sure, and some trails and tendencies for the future standards and certification on batteries and cells storage and prevention, if you want. So the context is well known. There is a deep increase of the selling of the BEV, or BEV is full electric cars. Now we are now reaching, after bridging the gap of 1 million, sorry for the curve, which is not the curve I expected to show, sorry for that. After bridging the gap of 1 million worldwide sold cars in 2017, we are now more than 7 million. This new, it's a trend, and also the second point of this strong trend is that there is a kind of immediate bad perception of the battery risk. Immediately saying when a Roro boat is burning in Netherlands, immediately finger pointing the electric cars, even if after we discover that was not the cause of the fire. And also, when you are on the social network, you can see that every day you have a new movie of a two-wheel burning in a house, or a skateboard, or I don't know, or a car, of course. So there is a very bad perception, and that's constitute kind of reluctancy of the development of this new energy power, new energy carrier. So the context in Europe is very clear. The huge demand implies a very large development of factories in Europe. You see the map, that's an incredible development, but right now only two factories are producing cells in Europe. It's Northvolt, which is in Sweden, and our Giga factory, which is in north of France, who was opened in March and will definitely produce at industrial scale in November. There is also, to be complete, in Central Europe, some big factories such as CATL and also Envision producing batteries and cells for Volkswagen and other brands who did some agreement to have this factory in Europe. But all I show here is mainly project. And you see that the demand is big. It's 12 million of battery by year. And our company aimed to build 3 gigafactories, one in Germany, one in Italy, and one in France, aiming to produce in 27. It's not very clear, but it's 150 megawatt hour. It's not very clear for you, but it means more interesting is to say that 1 gigafactory produces, you see the cell, produces 150,000 cells per day. 1 gigafactory. So we will have 3 of these, one in Germany, one in Italy. It's a kind of a shoebox, small shoebox. So it's the reason why I put this slide, because with this slide you can see what are we producing and what is the main trend on batteries. The cell is a kind of small shoebox. Weight is for us around 3 kilo, and the power is 1 kilowatt hour for a box. And we build ex nihilo the cells. So I repeat, the business plan is on 550,000 cells per day in Europe in 27. And we assemble them in modules. Modules are a collection of cells, depending from the client. It can be 8, 12, or 16 cells assembled with electric, but without any battery storage management, IT management system. No. And the manufacturer build a battery pack, assembling different modules, and also adapting a battery management system, informatic, an IT system to manage the battery. So you see what, when I speak about module, you understand. When I speak about a cell, you understand, and the pack is in the car. So battery is a general word which is mainly by the specialist. It's not used so much. So now I want to show you the first information. First information is that the state of charge is very important to support the risk. The point is that if you have a battery which is not charged, it's not dangerous. But let's see these 2 movies. That's a 30% charged battery. So you will see mainly we have smoke. We declare the thermal runaway. The thermal runaway is is done by short circuit. So that was the first. Mainly, what I want to say is mainly when we produce, we store, and we transport these batteries, these cells, they are at 30% SOC, state of charge. If I go now to see the second case, which is 100% charge cell. You see the difference. It's more energetic and more flames. What is burning? At first, the electrolyte. Electrolyte is comparable to a solvent. So in the box, in the shoebox, you have electrolyte. But when it lasts longer, you can burn the graphite and the black carbon, which is component of the electrodes. And also, maybe if it lasts very longly, you can also burn some metals such as copper or aluminum, who constitutes the core of the electrodes. What to be said? For sure, if you follow, if we have a thermal monitoring, for sure we can identify that the SOC influence the level of temperature more than 1,000 degrees if it's full charge, or less if it's under 30%. So that's a little bit obvious. But where is the risk? To be honest, the risk is everywhere, because it's in the factory where we produce the cells. It's in the storages. Sometimes the storage is distant from the battery production manufacturer, transportation, car, boat, train, car manufacturers, of course, when they build the battery pack. Also, again, transportation, boats, train, cars, and also in the garage in the cities, because the seller will have to change some modules, and on the road everywhere, and in the home, in the garage. So it's a new danger, but it's exactly the same for gasoline cars. Now, about cooling resources. I will show you the main problem, which is depicted when a car catches fire. So when we want to extinguish a cell, it burns for hours. Why is it the case? Because at first, the cell is very condensed device. So the electrodes are very, very close from themselves, and the water does not penetrate enough to extinguish the fire, because it's a fire, as I said, quite a normal fire, can be probably burn some metallic things, but the point is that it's very difficult to extinguish it. So sorry, I had some problem with my presentation. Okay. No. Yes, I understand why I've got a problem with my presentation, because I began by the second one. So what is mainly the main process we use when we have a cell or a module fire? We pour it in water, very simply. You can see that we will drop the cell in water, in a water tank, and that immediately fix the problem by penetrating slowly inside the cell to extinguish all components. And also for the cars, there are some devices, use some tool, operational tool, to immerse the car. But many trials experimenting all the extinguishers who are on the market, very expensive extinguishers dedicated to lithium-ion batteries. But it was not so convincing, honestly. I don't want to go in deep in this comparative study we did 6 months ago. But however, it's clear that for the process and for the manufacturing, the best tool is to immerse the cell in a tank. It also explains why there is a need of so much water to extinguish a car, because after building a car, you protect very completely the cells and the modules in boxes. So the water is unable to reach clearly and quickly the cells to extinguish it. But it's not a nightmare. It's just a complex thing that can be solved. So
apologies,
yes.
2 minutes left.
Yes, that's my last slide. Very quickly about the future. The future, right now, we have only the car manufacturer specification, who are a little bit tricky sometimes, because they, from the beginning, there is some separators between the cells and between the cells in the module, meaning that it gives more time for the fire, because the propagation in the module is slowed down by the separators, which are dedicated in design to slow down the fire. So it's a little bit a tricky specification. ISO is now working to impose a kind of sprinkler, dry sprinkler network in the modules in the cars to be connected to fire hoses by firemen to better extinguish the cars. And on another hand, for our storages, we issued some very fine standards to protect our storages by sprinkler, integrating the best practices and also the insurance test did, for example, by Factory Mutual in the United States, and also the recommendation of European insurance. So, to conclude, right now it's a gray zone, no regulations, and we are only sharing best practice despite no formal organization of interprofessional manufacturers. And because in the soon future, regulation will occur, and we will probably have to retrofit some things if the regulation are over the standard we currently use in our manufacturing process. So I'm available for questions. Thank you to all of you.
The backdrop and rationale for this study is that we looked into the concept of comprehensive security and total defense. These are basically frameworks for managing very complex crises, like COVID-19 is one of them. You could argue, at least at the onset, that the Ukraine war at least looked like it could be one of them. Of course, for Ukraine, it still is. And in this context of a complex transboundary crisis, we decided to go one step down and look at the preparedness plans. And how were they able to encompass and call it really realize in a way for the crisis manager how to face complex situations. And the important part here is that these plans that we looked at with regards to specific situations, where how did these plans match a disaster or a crisis at the onset, so when the crisis started, or when the crisis manager became aware of the crisis. So our research question was, at the onset of a transboundary crisis, to what extent are plans and principles put to use, modified, or discarded altogether? And if you look at the threefold alternative at the research question, they are derived from Weick's concept of sense making, which basically is a process where you try to turn the circumstances you see around you into something that you can comprehend explicitly in words. And when you do comprehend it, what are we going to do next? So that's basically the approach that we took to this paper and this article. When I'll be talking now, I will also be mentioning crisis management. I will talk about crisis management as a broad process. So also what you do before, let's say planning, what you do during, you manage it afterwards, you have consequence management, and then you have this period lessons learned and updating plans. So it's the entire process I'm talking about. And a transboundary crisis, you can see how I defined it on the screen. It's basically a crisis that can affect all levels of society, both sectorial and administrative, and it can have a different effect in different sectors and administrations. I do know that there are some that use the term polycrisis, which is basically when two major crises strikes at once. In this paper, at least, I will stick to the concept of transboundary crisis. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the Norwegian national context, so that you, if you think this is interesting and applicable, can see how it fits your own systems. In Norway, the Directorate for Civil Protection makes national scenarios. It doesn't make them alone. They bring together different stakeholders that have specific expertise on a scenario. For instance, for the COVID scenario that we had, not for the pandemic scenario that we had before COVID, the health authorities, of course, were central in making this. We also have scenarios for cyber, for landslides, for severe bad weather, hybrid threats, and we also used to have a scenario for a small military conflict. So let's say that someone comes in and annexed parts of your country, which is, at least in Europe now, quite high on the agenda. In this study, we focused on the county governors. So they are the heads of specific regions in Norway, and under the county governors, you have the municipalities. And both the county governors and the municipalities make preparedness plans, and they use, for instance, the analysis that are made by the DSB as part of their baseline when they are making this. These scenarios and also a method in how to make them are readily available at the DSB's site if that is of interest. So we made ourselves an analytical model, what you could call the task environment. What's going on can be defined as the area outside the organization where things are happening. We put up transboundary and complex crisis in this, for instance, pandemics and hybrid attacks and war. Then we look at the institutional framework. And by the institutional framework, I mean all the formal and informal structures that form our perceptions and allow us to what to do and not to do. One very clear-cut part of the institutional framework would be the Norwegian principle for emergency preparedness. In Norway, we have 4 of them that are underlying all kinds of crisis management. I know that Finland, for instance, have a lot more, but they are also a bit more vague, so you can put some interpretation in them. And I guess that this is pretty similar in other countries. So at the onset, we looked at how do your pre-existing emergency plans match the action that you need to take, for instance, when COVID struck or when you first heard about the Ukraine war. So we have these 3 categories that I touched upon earlier. What we saw when it came to both COVID-19 and the Ukraine, the onset of the Ukraine war, sense making quite overarchingly speaking, boiled down to 2 things. One was questions put to what are our role and how do we organize for this? Some actors more or less defined themselves out of it, but had to, revert and go back afterwards and realize that they actually had a part. Others felt that they should have a bigger role than they were assigned at the onset. So the roles and organization issues were pretty high up on the agenda when it came to how do we actually manage this crisis. Because as mentioned initially, a transboundary crisis is cross-sectorial in its nature. And when you have a crisis between sectors, you also develop gray areas, which is difficult. Which makes it difficult for the crisis management to decide, is this my crisis or is it yours, or do we need to talk together, etc. In that regard, collaboration, for instance, is one of the crisis management principles in Norway. The other went to situational awareness. What do I know? What would this crisis look like in 3 days, 1 week, 1 month? Basically foresight. But also it boiled down to what kind of needs would we have in the next 3 days or 3 months. So a lot was related to that. We did a survey. The methodology was a survey. It was also singular semi-structured interviews and a quite comprehensive document study. But I thought I would just show you the studies. These are the answers of the county governors. And as you can see, COVID-19 is the blue, Ukraine war is the orange. And actually only 1 county of the 7 counties asked found their plans to be able to handle a situation at the outbreak of COVID, whereas 3 of 7 actually found that the Ukraine war was more readily they were more readily able to do things with regards to that. Probably it also has something to do with that crisis management plans have been high on the agenda after COVID. But here at least you can see how the answers were. We also gave them a possibility to comment their response. And this is some of the responses that we picked out for substitute action. So if you remember the analytical model, you have 3 choices. You could either use your plans, you can make a substitute action, which is basically either amend the plans or do something else at once. Or the third option was that you need to think about it. You don't know what to do and you need time. So this is the substitute action. And these were typical replies from the county governors, crisis managers, based on roles and organizations and situational understanding. So we found this data quite rich, and it was actually quite hard to pick out the quotes that we would like to use because there were so many of them. But a lot of the other quotes with regards to substitute action are quite similar to this one, so it gives quite a good idea. To sum a bit up before I open for questions, one thing that this might look a bit more scientific than it is, but one of the impressions that we got from the document study, the survey, and the interviews is that if the scenario plans are too dominant in your crisis management plans, you might be hamstrung when the crisis starts. You rely too much on them, and then the actual situation don't fit your scenario-based plans, and you struggle in the start. Whereas where others that they had quite what we call baseline preparedness, were able to start quite a focused crisis management from the onset. As I said, this is something that we learned during the interviews. We still need to do more research on this model, but it's just to give you an image of one of the things that we found out in this process so far. So I think that's it for me.
Since your conference is somehow related to the main topics, which is from the field of emergency management, I will be talking about an area where safety management, security management is very important. It is related to nuclear and radiation safety, and especially in our paper, we are going to make sort of overview of the problems Ukraine is now facing because they have 4 big nuclear power plants. They have many laboratories, many hospitals. Radioactive materials are used or stored in waste repository. And some of these facilities are located in area where there are still going some military operations, and some of those buildings were destroyed, damaged, and this not only radioactive but other chemicals, simply dangerous materials, escape, were released into the environment, and local population may be affected. So back to these problems in Ukraine, as you could see, they started in February 2022, where Ukraine was attacked, mainly from Russian territory, but also partially from Belarus. The beginning of this invasion was annexation of some parts of territory of Ukraine. As you can see, Russians were very successful to take some parts in the north and to shift the borders with Lugansk and other territory they already controlled. Later on, they had to retreat from some of these places, especially from Kharkiv and other locations. And during these operations, some of the buildings, as I mentioned, were destroyed, and dangerous materials stored or used there was released into the local environment, and population cannot be protected because first they didn't know about this danger, and second, they have to use mask or protective clothing and so on, which was not the case. Anyway, this is one of danger which we have to consider, and we have to introduce some measures to control, release, and control people to be affected as low level as possible. So this was at the beginning. The important thing, which so far has not brought big problems, at least up to now, are sources of high activity of radionuclides, which are in 4 nuclear power plants, Rivne nuclear power plants in western part of Ukraine, Melnitsky not far away, then South Ukraine nuclear power plants, and especially the largest nuclear power plant, one of the largest in the world actually, where 6 nuclear reactors is in Zaporozhye. It was partially affected, but not really reactors, because there were some fighting around. So these are the source of radioactivity, of radiation, and one has to be prepared for the situation when some of these big sources are attacked and radioactive material is released into the environment. So here you can see, including number of reactors in these 4 nuclear power plants. Ukraine is very much dependent on the electricity produced in nuclear power plants. And we know what happened many years ago in Chernobyl nuclear power plant, where all reactors were shut down, but still place is known to have a high activity radionuclides, and it is protected against entering from outside, because since radioactivity is excessive. So I would like only to outline again protection and impact relevant to the uncontrollable release of radioactive sources, which may become orphans. It means they are not under control, and people may not be aware that they are coming in contact with such sources. This characteristic or main parameters of this 4 still active nuclear power plants and Chernobyl nuclear power plants facilities, reactors were shut down, but still a place should be kept under control, should be monitored, should be protected against people who may not be aware of what danger can be expected. So this is a short characteristic, how many reactors individual nuclear power plants have, and what is the output, what electricity is produced in megawatts. The situation is, or used to be, monitored very precisely. There are monitoring stations in many places across the country. But if locally radioactivity is released, so this monitoring station may not detect it because it is locally distributed to the environment. So sometimes officially we know that, or we cannot rely on the news that all monitoring stations are showing radiation level which is below certain limits, which is considered to be dangerous. Because especially in places which are far away from monitoring station, situation may be different. So, as everywhere, we have to introduce some measures to protect nuclear power plants against terrorist attacks, against sabotage. And now it's very easy to find means to attack such places where huge activity may be released and affect local population, including using drones. As you know, International Atomic Energy Agency plays a significant role throughout the world to introduce standards, to introduce a system which can control or can monitor radiation, so it is kept below the level which is considered safe. International Atomic Energy Agency is very active and is in daily contacts and has also some people in Ukraine who are monitoring the situation. Director General Grossi visited several times Ukraine. He met several times President Volodymyr Zelensky. So the agency is closely watching what is going on, and of course they are trying to convince all parties involved that they have to pay attention to nuclear safety and security. So there are many meetings, many specialists from agencies are coming to visit Ukraine. Some are staying for longer period. Some parts or not far from some of these nuclear power plants, there were noticed that there are some attacks. So far, fortunately, main sources of radioactive materials were not affected. So far, so good, one can say, but we cannot rely on such a lack. Still, even Chernobyl should be kept under control because there is still huge amount of radioactive materials, and situation should be monitored. Before, as you know, this area, especially northeast and north was contaminated. So we now know how to protect ourselves against radiation. We know maybe about radiation effects more than we know about effects of any other dangerous materials, because a lot of resources were spent in research. We can monitor radiation at a very low level. We know how to protect people, but of course we have to identify the source and we have to monitor the situation to be able to assess the risk. Of course, there are some controversial opinion, even what radiation can do, how harmful it can be. Chernobyl, there was expectation that several tens of thousands of people may die, which is strictly speaking not true. We expect that following Chernobyl disaster, there will be something like 4, maximum 5,000 dead people due to exposure to radioactive materials released from Chernobyl. But we have to realize that there are 4,000 people from population which was exposed to radiation, and it's something like 4 to 5 million. So it's of course very small number if you realize that because of cancer, out of 5 million, you may expect that more than 1 million people will die because of different cancer. So this is small proportion, but anyway, we have to do whatever we can to reduce this number. But I wanted to just emphasize that sometimes it is exaggerated. The effect of radiation. So we have scientific knowledge. We can evaluate what we may expect, but it is those effects are probabilistic. It means that may happen or not happen. So we may use probability to expect what may happen after exposure of people. So this illustration about how we can protect against external radiation and against radioactive contamination, because a person can be affected by radiation. Either he or she can be exposed to external radiation from sources outside our body, or from internal contamination. It means this is the case when radioactive materials may enter the body through to our body through consumption and through water. So these two kinds of exposures should be considered, and the final quantity, which is expressing the level of exposure, is effective dose. So I may come to the end of my presentation. Also, my other colleagues participated. Because there are some side effects like like this Kakhovska Dam was destroyed. This also caused some problems, and even storage or places where dangerous materials are used also may cause their release. If it comes to help, to assistance or to help to Ukraine, of course, still United States is the highest or the most powerful donor, and other countries are trying to do their best under the circumstances. As you can see, Czech Republic is very active, and we are we accepted something like 500,000 refugees from Ukraine. So just to conclude my presentation, so we can see that the military operation on the territory of Ukraine, which was attacked, was invaded by Russian army, maybe potentially hazardous in terms of not only radioactive contamination, but by contamination of any dangerous or toxic materials which can be released from facilities where these materials were used. So radiation and nuclear facilities, some of them were affected. Fortunately, so far, have not been affected as big nuclear power plants, but we cannot rely on this. And in the near future, it may also happen that some of them may be attacked. So I only would like to stress that this is only part of this negative effect, which is related to this military operations. Unfortunately, still going on the territory of Ukraine. There are many other dangerous materials, but radioactive materials and nuclear materials are one of them. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So I want to just kind of review where we are with pandemic tracking in the United States. And so before COVID, already in 1994, there was a book by Laurie Garrett called The Coming Plague. And she talked a lot about how, I mean, this is a very big book, but her conclusions are that we were unprepared for the coming plague. And this was 1994. And in the year 2000, she wrote another book called Betrayal of Trust. And she talked about the collapse of the global public health system. And so, it also applied to the United States. Now, here's a list from Wikipedia from 2000 to the present time of epidemics and pandemics. And these arrows point to epidemics and pandemics that affected the United States. So obviously, we're not going to go through them. Of course, this is the big one here, the COVID-19 pandemic. But you can see there has been a steady kind of flow of epidemics and issues. The monkeypox virus is sort of the most recent one that affected the United States. So anyway, so the U.S. attempted to deal with this problem in a number of ways, but clearly the U.S. did not handle the COVID pandemic well, and quite frankly, nobody handled it well. So there was, in 2014, the U.S. set up the National Security Council Directorate for Global Health Security and Biodefense. And then in 2018, the Trump administration disbanded it, but it's not entirely clear what happened because they kept all the staff except for the director and kind of absorbed the mission into other parts of the National Security Council. And critics attacked this, saying that this would make us less prepared, but it's not entirely clear whether we would have been more prepared because it just wasn't clear how many resources were given to the original committee. So this is a political point about whether they should have kept that office or not, but we'll see. But it turns out that nobody had a good response to COVID, and everybody ended up suffering. And clearly, we need to rethink how to properly anticipate and respond to future pandemics, because what happened with COVID was not a good thing. Now, during the COVID pandemic, so first we talked a little bit about before the pandemic. So what happened during the pandemic? Well, It forced the United States to invest in its public health infrastructure, and Johns Hopkins University and the New York Times established extensive, very informative databases that presented many details about COVID, not just for the United States, but for the world as well. And these databases were updated daily. US hospitals were collecting a lot of information. There was a lot of testing going on, monitoring, reporting. And we noticed that one of the difficult parts of COVID were the major changes in the strains of COVID that were appearing. But anyway, here's a sample of the sort of reporting that was being done. And the interesting thing is what's being reported here are cases. You notice it doesn't say hospitalizations or deaths because they had those statistics as well. And, this just sort of went on with lots of details, what was happening in the world, how many deaths, hospitalizations, and, so these are some of the, so even with all this information, it was still difficult to, this was for the Delta variant. And, okay, and then there's a website called covariance.org that shows how you can see here COVID starting up, and then this is kind of what percentage of all cases belong to the various variants. So you can see this dark green color here is this 21J. I'm not a biologist, so I can't tell you exactly why things were numbered in this particular way, but it gave you pretty interesting information. And of course, people were worried that the vaccine that was prepared for one variant might be less effective for new variants. And you could see there was some quick migration. And we're going to talk about more contemporary patterns to see how we're doing. And, lots of articles and, just a lot of information. And you can see here are the COVID deaths. So at one point, the deaths from COVID exceeded the deaths from heart disease and cancer. And even as late as February 22, it was still like the second leading cause of death. I think now it's the fourth leading cause of death. But even to this day, COVID is still very effective. So after COVID, we now have vaccines, and we've vastly speeded up our ability to manufacture high quality vaccines. I mean, at one point, people were expecting it might take 10 years to create effective vaccines, but they started coming out after a year. But it's still very alarming at what's happening with the variants. So here's an updated chart, and you can see that this is the chart I showed you before. But look at what's happening. We're getting large displacements by new variants at a very, very quick rate. You see, like Delta was active for almost half a year. But then if you look at some of these other strains coming in, they're not active for very long before they're replaced with new strains. And that's a little concerning because if the strains vary enough, it's possible they might get by the effects that are given us, the protection that's given to us by vaccines. So I'm kind of a little concerned at the speed with which new variants are kind of taking over. So let's hope. And this chart here shows you the kind of evolutionary history of the different strains. So you can see this is a really dangerous virus because it has all these variations and offshoots and things like that. And we just have to hope that nothing too awful developed. So now after COVID, you have articles that say COVID continues to rise, but experts remain optimistic. Well, I'm glad the experts are optimistic. I'm a little more worried maybe than the experts. But if you go to the New York Times now, you have to actually look for where their COVID news is. It's not, I mean, before it was featured on the front page. And so as of May, of this year, COVID was the fourth leading cause of death in the United States. So it's not 1, 2, or 3, but still, it's a very serious disease. And you notice right here, here's the website in March 23 of this year, and it says New York Times is ending its COVID-19 data gathering operations. So they're not collecting this information anymore. Hospitals are not supplying it. Testing centers are not supplying it. This is the new site that the New York Times has. If you search enough, you get this site. But you notice the only thing we're really tracking is how many people are being admitted to the hospital. Okay. And you can see that as of September 14th, we've had a 25% increase in the number of people admitted. Now, one of the difficulties is if you look at this part here, you can see that most of the people admitted are older people, and younger people are not being hospitalized. Doesn't mean that they're not being sick. It just means they're not being hospitalized. But because we're not collecting statistics on just people being sick, we don't really know what's going on here. And with these new variants and no information, I think that's a precarious situation. Now, Johns Hopkins University had a very extensive website where you could get all kinds of information down to the local level. And you can see here that they stopped collecting data as of March 10th, 2023. And now in 2022, they created a new center within the White House to monitor pandemics. But look at the length of the name: the National Biodefense Strategy and Implementation Plan for Countering Biological Threats, Enhancing Pandemic Preparedness, and Achieving Global Health Security. I'm just not impressed because you have such a long name for this organization. In fact, I'm concerned that they spend so much time on the name that I'm not sure how much time they spend on really thinking about what they're going to do. I also checked out the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and to see what information they have. And they really don't have very much. They have these kind of general cartoon-like things, and then you can find out about COVID in your county. So I picked the county that my university is in. This is Cobb County, Georgia. And all it says is the hospital admissions level is low. There's not even a chart. There's not even a graph. I can't compare the numbers, this week to last week or last month or anything like that. Part of the problem is the United Nations has declared an end to COVID-19. Biden has declared an end to the pandemic, and most of the American public are acting like it's over. And here's the Cleveland Clinic saying, no, the COVID pandemic isn't over. And as I say, right now, it's affecting the older population and still seriously, that you have thousands of cases. And one of the problems that's happened is that this issue, instead of being just a public health issue, has become a political issue. And people, instead of realizing sort of the benefit that they receive from the medical research that produced vaccines, politically now people want deep cuts to health funding. So what are the conclusions? There's no doubt that the U.S. is investing less time and effort in monitoring the COVID pandemic. I suspect that this is true and that a similar situation is occurring all over the world, not just in the US. And we're not doing much to prepare for any new pandemic. And despite vaccines saving thousands and millions of lives, people are developing a skepticism about vaccines and medical science in general. And this can only hurt the US response to new pandemics in the future. And one of the issues is that the reduced amount of data collection hampers our research, and it's now harder to track. In other words, we know that lots of older people are going to the hospital, but how many younger people are sick? How many infections are there? We are lacking this very basic information. And I want to just conclude with this quote from famous philosopher George Santayana: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So I'm kind of very concerned that we're going to end up very much in the same boat if another major pandemic comes along. Thank you.